The parking lot at Children's Memorial Hospital was supposed to be the easy part. Find a space, pay the meter, rush inside to save your child. But families kept talking about miracles happening before they even reached the hospital doors. Hot coffee appearing on frozen windshields, dead batteries mysteriously charged, parking meters that never seemed to expire. For 15 years, something extraordinary had been occurring in that concrete lot, and when Ellen uncovered the truth about the man in the orange vest, she realized that sometimes healing begins in the most unexpected places. The studio was buzzing with its usual pre-show excitement. Ellen had just finished her opening dance to Lizzo. The audience was still energized from the surprise gift card giveaway, and the warm afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows seemed to promise that this would be one of those episodes that touched hearts and changed lives. Frank Torres sat in the green room, nervously adjusting his tie, a navy blue tie that his daughter had bought him specifically for this appearance. At 55, Frank had the weathered hands and sun-lined face of someone who had spent decades working outdoors, but his dark eyes held a gentleness that children instinctively trusted and parents found comforting during their most frightening moments. Frank had never imagined he would be sitting backstage at the Ellen DeGeneres show. 4 weeks earlier, a producer had called him at home, explaining that multiple families had written to nominate him for their Guardian Angels segment. Frank had been genuinely confused. He worked as a parking attendant at Children's Memorial Hospital in Chicago. What could possibly be remarkable about helping people find parking spaces? What Frank didn't know was that his story had come to the show's attention through a social media campaign started by Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric oncologist at Children's Memorial. She had posted about the parking lot angel who makes impossible days bearable, and within days, hundreds of families had shared their own stories about Frank using the hashtag #SheParkingLotAngel. Frank Torres, "You're ready in 5 minutes," a production assistant announced. Frank took a deep breath, said a quick prayer, and followed the assistant toward the stage. As he walked through the corridors lined with photos of Ellen's most inspiring guests, he thought about the thousands of families he had met over the years, wondering if any of them remembered the man in the orange vest who had tried to make their hardest days a little easier. Ellen's introduction was warm and intriguing. "My next guest has worked in the parking lot at Children's Memorial Hospital for 15 years, but according to the families who know him, he's not just a parking attendant, he's a guardian angel who happens to direct traffic. Please welcome Frank Torres." The audience applauded as Frank walked onto the stage, his nervousness evident, but his natural warmth shining through. Ellen greeted him with her signature hug and immediately sensed the genuine humility radiating from this man. "Frank, thank you for being here," Ellen said as they settled onto the familiar white couch. 15 years in a hospital parking lot. That must mean you've met a lot of families during very difficult times. Frank's face grew serious but warm. "Yes, Ellen. Children's Memorial is a wonderful hospital, but families only come there when their child is very sick. Every car that pulls into my parking lot carries parents who are scared, exhausted, and dealing with the worst time of their lives." Ellen leaned forward with interest. "That must be emotionally challenging work. How do you handle being around that much fear and sadness every day?" "You learn that sometimes the smallest gestures can make the biggest difference," Frank said thoughtfully. "When a family is rushing in with a sick child, the last thing they should worry about is finding a parking space or having enough quarters for the meter." Ellen studied Frank's expression, noting the depth of emotion in his voice. "Do you go beyond just helping them park?" Frank paused, clearly choosing his words carefully. "I do what anyone would do. If someone needs help, you help them. It's that simple." Ellen's producer instincts were telling her there was much more to this story. "Frank, we've received some very interesting letters about you. Families describing you as their parking lot angel. Can you tell me what that might mean? Frank looked down at his hands, then back up at Ellen, with the kind of honesty that only comes from someone who has never learned to be anything but truthful. I see the same families coming back day after day, week after week, sometimes month after month, Frank said quietly. A child's treatment isn't just one visit, it's a journey. And I realized that if I could help make that journey a little easier, even in small ways, maybe it would help. The studio had grown noticeably quieter. Ellen felt that familiar tightness in her chest that always preceded her most meaningful interviews. "What kind of help do you provide, Frank?" Frank's voice grew softer as he began to share. "Well, I keep track of which families have been coming regularly. I make sure they get the closest parking spaces so they don't have to walk far with sick children. I keep quarters in my pocket for families who don't have enough for the meter. And in the winter, I keep the cars running while families are inside so they don't have to return to a freezing car with a sick child." Ellen was leaning forward now, completely engaged. "Frank, that sounds like much more than parking assistance." "Children's treatments can take hours," Frank continued. "I see parents who haven't eaten all day because they're too worried to leave their child's side. I see families sleeping in their cars because they can't afford hotel rooms. I see parents crying in the parking lot because they feel helpless." Ellen's eyes were already glistening. "And what do you do when you see that?" Frank looked directly at Ellen with the sincerity that had comforted thousands of families. "I pay attention. I remember names. I check on families. I bring hot coffee on cold days and cold water on hot days. I clean snow off windshields and jump dead batteries. And sometimes I just listen when parents need someone to talk to." The audience was completely silent now. Several people in the front row were wiping their eyes. "Frank," Ellen said softly, "you're describing a level of care that goes far beyond any job description." "These families become part of your heart," Frank replied. "When you see a child fighting for their life, when you see parents who would do anything to save their child, you can't just watch from the sidelines. You have to help, however you can." Ellen stood up and walked around the coffee table, clearly moved by what she was hearing. "Frank, can you give me a specific example of how you've helped a family?" Frank was quiet for a moment, then began speaking in a voice filled with both sadness and hope. "There was the Martinez family. Their little boy, Diego, was receiving chemotherapy for leukemia. They had to come 3 times a week for 6 months. I noticed they were always counting change for the parking meter, and they looked exhausted. So I started making sure their meter never expired, and I kept blankets in my shed for when Diego was too weak to walk, and they had to carry him." Frank's voice grew stronger as he continued. "I also noticed they were eating vending machine food, so I started bringing extra sandwiches my wife made. And when Diego lost his hair and was embarrassed about it, I bought him a Cubs baseball cap and told him it made him look like a champion." Ellen was openly crying now. "What happened to Diego?" Frank's face lit up with joy. "He's been cancer-free for 3 years now. He's playing Little League Baseball and wearing that same Cubs cap." Ellen reached for a tissue and handed one to Frank as well. "Frank, do you realize what you've done? You've been providing emotional support, practical assistance, and hope to families during the most terrifying times of their lives." "They gave me hope too," Frank said quietly. "Every family taught me something about courage, about love, about never giving up." Ellen looked toward her producers in the booth and made the gesture that meant, "Whatever happens next, we're going with it." "Frank, I think there are some people who want to meet you," Ellen announced. Frank looked confused as several families began walking onto the stage from different entrances. First came a Hispanic couple with a young boy wearing a Cubs baseball cap. Then a woman with a teenage girl who was carrying a poster. Finally, an older couple walked on stage with a man in his 20s. Frank's face went completely white as he recognized them all. "The Martinez family," Frank said, standing up quickly. "Diego, Maria, Roberto, what are you doing here?" Diego Martinez, now a healthy 10-year-old, ran straight to Frank and threw his arms around him. "Mr. Frank, I still have my Cubs cap." Maria Martinez approached Frank with tears streaming down her face. "Frank, we're here because you are our family's guardian angel, and the world needs to know who you are." The teenage girl stepped forward with her poster, which read, "Thank you, Mr. Frank," in colorful letters. "Mr. Frank, I'm Emma. You helped my family when I was in the hospital for heart surgery. You cleaned our car every day and always had encouraging words for my parents." The older couple approached with their adult son. "Frank, I'm Mrs. Patterson, and this is my son Michael. You helped us through Michael's brain tumor treatment 5 years ago. You were there every single day, making sure we never felt alone." Frank was overwhelmed, tears streaming down his face as he hugged each family member. Ellen waited for the emotional greetings to settle before addressing the group. "I want each of you to tell us specifically what Frank did for your family." Roberto Martinez spoke first. "Frank didn't just help us park, he became part of our support system. During Diego's darkest days, when we didn't know if our son would survive, Frank was a constant source of hope and practical help. He made sure we never worried about anything except Diego's health." Emma's mother nodded enthusiastically. "Frank has this incredible ability to anticipate what families need, before they even know they need it. Hot coffee on cold mornings, umbrellas when it rained, tissues when we were crying. He seemed to appear exactly when we needed him most." Michael Patterson, the brain tumor survivor, stepped forward. "Frank, you probably don't remember, but you talked to me every day when I was afraid. You told me stories about other kids who had gotten better, and you made me believe I could be one of them too." Ellen was sobbing now. "Frank, do you understand what you've done? You've been providing family support services, emotional counseling, and practical assistance to hundreds of families." "They helped me too," Frank said quietly. "Every family that trusted me with their story, every child who smiled at me despite being sick, they made my life meaningful." But the surprises weren't over. Ellen reached for her desk and returned with several folders. "Frank, while we were preparing for this show, we contacted Children's Memorial Hospital. We discovered some incredible things about you." Frank looked nervous. "What kind of things?" "The hospital administration told us that in 15 years, they have never received a single complaint about parking services. In fact, they receive thank you letters about you every week. They also told us that patient satisfaction scores are significantly higher on days when you're working." Frank stared at Ellen in amazement. "I had no idea anyone was tracking that." "But there's more," Ellen continued. "We also discovered that you've never taken a sick day in 15 years because you didn't want to let families down. And according to your supervisor, you arrive an hour early and stay an hour late every day without being asked." Ellen stood up and walked to her desk, returning with her personal checkbook. "Frank, for 15 years, you've been providing services that would normally require multiple staff members: customer service, social work, facility maintenance, and emotional support." Ellen began writing a check as she spoke. "I'm writing you a check for $50,000 because you've been doing the work of 5 people while being paid for 1. The audience erupted in applause as Ellen handed Frank the check, but Ellen held up her hand. "But Frank, I want to do something else. I've been in contact with the hospital administration, and they want to create the Frank Torres Family Support Program. It would be a formal program that provides the kind of comprehensive care you've been giving informally." Frank sat down heavily on the couch, overwhelmed by everything that was happening. "Ellen, this is too much. I was just doing what felt right." "That's exactly what made it work," Diego Martinez interrupted. "Mr. Frank, you made us feel like family instead of just patients." Ellen wasn't finished. "Frank, there's one more surprise. The American Hospital Association wants to consult with you on creating a national model for family support services. They want to train parking and support staff at children's hospitals across the country to provide the kind of care you naturally give." Frank looked at all the families surrounding him, then at Ellen, then at the audience of people who were giving him a standing ovation. "I just wanted to help," he whispered. "I never expected any of this." "That's exactly why you deserve all of this," Ellen replied. "You helped because it was right, not because you wanted recognition. You're proof that heroes work in parking lots." 6 months later, the Frank Torres Family Support Program had been implemented at Children's Memorial and was being studied by hospitals nationwide. Frank had been promoted to Director of Family Services, overseeing a team of specially trained staff who provided comprehensive support to families. But perhaps the most beautiful change was that Frank was no longer working alone. He now had a team of people who shared his passion for making difficult journeys easier for families, and the parking lot at Children's Memorial had become known as the most caring and supportive in the medical field. Ellen visited the hospital 3 months after the show and found Frank training new staff members in what had become known as the Frank Method, an approach to family support that emphasized dignity, anticipation of needs, and genuine human connection. "Any regrets about leaving the parking lot?" Ellen asked. Frank smiled, watching his team help a family unload their car. "I'm still in the parking lot every day, but now, instead of working alone, I have 12 people who understand that our job isn't just parking cars, it's parking hope, parking comfort, and parking love right where families need it most." The Frank Torres model had become a template for hospitals everywhere, proving that sometimes the most sophisticated patient care system is simply having someone who pays attention, who remembers names, and who understands that healing happens not just inside the hospital, but in every interaction a family has from the moment they arrive. Because sometimes the most important medicine isn't dispensed from a pharmacy. It's delivered by someone in an orange vest who knows that a warm car, a kind word, and a Cubs baseball cap can be exactly what a family needs to keep fighting.